Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to our series Conversation with Scholars. In this series, GCU students will engage in discussions with leading scholars on emerging discourses and on critical ideas. These discussions will be recorded and made available on social media. At GCU, more than 50 student societies are involved in diverse activities, all aiming towards honing the skill sets of students in ways that directly and indirectly impact this world. Such interactive sessions will prepare our students to both engage in and manage constructive discussions in the public sphere. These discussions will also contribute towards building up culture of reading and learning. By promoting new ideas, we intend to sensitize ourselves to improve the quality of life and to appreciate the plurality of this world. Gareth History Society of Department of History has taken this initiative of bringing the interactions between our students and scholars within easy access for everyone. And an interactive session with Professor Dr. Tahir Kamran on his book on Colonial Lahore is only the first of its kind, to be followed by so many more in the future. Thank you.
Welcome to the Gareth History Society's web series of Conversation with Historians. I am Hassan Nawaz, an undergraduate student at the Department of History, Government College, University, Lahore. Our today's discussion will be on a wonderful book titled A History of the City of Lahore and Beyond. And we are very pleased to have the author, Professor Tahir Kamran, with us. Professor Kamran, a distinguished academic and historian, has served at several key positions in the educational institutions in Pakistan and beyond. He has been associated with the University of the Punjab, FC College, and Beaconhouse National University. And we are especially pleased to mention his longest association with Government College, University, Lahore, where he began his career as assistant professor in 1994 and took an early retirement in 2019 while serving as the professor of history, chairperson of the Department of History, and the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. His international exposures as an academic include the eminent appointment to the Allama Iqbal Professional Fellowship at Cambridge and visiting fellowship at Southampton University and at University of London. Utilizing his international experience, Professor Kamran has facilitated so many Pakistani students to go abroad for higher studies and engaged graduates of top-ranked universities to teach at GCU. It was under his leadership that GCU initiated its programs of BS, MPhil, and PhD in the Department of History. The benefit of Professor Kamran's recommendations in the policies of the Higher Education Commission has greatly altered the trajectory of the educational and teaching standards in the country. The Managing Director of Kuldunia Center for Historical Research in Lahore, member of Editorial Board of Journal of South Asia, and founding editor of Pakistan Journal of Historical Studies and of The Historian, Professor Kamran is currently serving on the editorial advisory board of many reputed scholarly journals. He has authored extensively and presented papers at many conferences and seminars on diverse subjects: the history of the Punjab, sectarianism, democracy, minorities, fundamentalism, and colonialism are to name just a few. Professor Kamran, thank you so very much for taking out time for this conversation. Before we begin a discussion on your excellent work, I would like to introduce my co-panelists to you. These are Nimra, Zamir, and Salman. They are undergrad students at the Department of History and also the office bearers of the Gareth History Society. Salman, you please start the question session.
Professor Kamran, my question is about the choice of topic. Many books are written on the history of Lahore. How do you see your book? Why another book on colonial Lahore?
Well, Salman, I think the theme of colonial Lahore has not exhausted, and rather I must say that that theme is scarcely addressed. You look at the books on Delhi, on Calcutta, on Madras, even on Karachi and Dhaka, as compared to these cities, Lahore, and particularly colonial Lahore, which was a transformation, the period of transformation for that great city. The material churned out on this, the city of Lahore was very, very scarce. Particularly what we try to flag and to bring into prominence was the connections that Lahore had during colonial period. What were the connections of Lahore with Delhi, with Calcutta, with Bombay, and what were the trade routes and how migration had taken place, and thereby the culture and the social formation that was epitomized by Lahore, how was it enriched. So I think, of course on colonial Lahore, the transformation within Lahore was very scarcely done, the connection of tourism, the establishment of institutions, or the history of sports, and particularly with respect to the social history of the urban space as Lahore had been. It had not been looked at before, some pamphleteering was done by Mr. Ghafir Shahzad and a few other people with respect to darwazas. But apart from Lahore Ka Chelsea, that is a very tiny book by Hakim Ahmed Shuja, there is no book on the culture, on the literary progress that Lahore contributed in. So all these tiny themes, which when converged into a bigger theme, it called for another book on Lahore. So that was the motivating factor that egged us on to write that book. So that's answer to your question, I think.
Thank you, sir. The way you have named the chapters as darwazas and mohallas, or poets, wrestlers and cricketers, makes this work a bit unconventional. British Empire somehow did intensify the phenomena of globalization in India. How do you intertwine the characteristics of globalization with local dynamics? Or in other words, how do you read the colonial Lahore in relation with other colonial cities?
Well, I think it's a three-pronged question. First is the chapterization and the way chapterization have been named, like darwazas and mohallas and all this. I think those darwazas and mahallas were the hub of the social and cultural activity before the modern Lahore came into being. As we have mentioned it in that book, that the Lahore Ka Chelsea, as Hakim Ahmed Shuja calls it. Chelsea is a region, is a vicinity in London, where all the literary and artistic movements collaborated and they got synthesized. So the same sort of role was played by Bhati Darwaza. Similarly, the Mochi Darwaza had its own role to play, particularly with respect to the political public meetings. Everyone who used to come to Lahore, the political leader, he liked to go to Mochi Darwaza and address a public meeting there. Similarly, the tradition of Mushaira, it started from Bhati Darwaza. And Bazar-e Hakima was very famous, Mahalla Jalwatiyan was very famous. Similarly, so far as musicians were concerned, all big musicians who created a name for themselves, not only in Pakistan but much beyond, they were at Takiya Mirasiyan and all these Havelis, Haveli Mian Khan, to name a few. So these darwazas and mahallas were the epicenter of socio-cultural activity. Therefore, those needed our attention, scholarly attention. Second was that why is it that that other cities, the migratory inflow became quite visible by the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century? Because Lahore had become a cultural capital that way of northern India. That's what Ian Talbot and myself, we debated about, and we reached this conclusion. the focus, the prime focus on Delhi was shifted to Lahore. And look at the institutional development. Government College Lahore was established. Mayo School of Arts was established. Similarly, HSN College. Similarly, Kinnaird College in 1914. And it was in 1914 that electricity was provided to Lahore. So Lahore came into the prominence because it was a hub of new cultural synthesis. And all those cultural currents coming from various cities, and they came here, they got synthesized, and they created a very powerful culture. Similarly, when you talk about wrestlers and cricketers and all this sports activity, particularly wrestlers and wrestling, wrestling as a spectacle, that was quite interesting. That akhada had been a great site of entertainment. And a person like Gama Pehlwan was an international figure. And the way they used to prepare themselves for wrestling and the whole akhada culture, that was something worth writing about, worth researching about, talking to people, learning from people. And I'm really a bit petrified that this very, very important feature, social and cultural feature of Lahore, has not been addressed to its full extent. And similarly, Gujranwala had this feature too. All these fellows, all these players and these wrestlers, professional wrestlers or whatever you may call them, they became international figures. Abdul Hafiz Kardar, for instance, was the product of Androon Sheher, Fazl Mahmood, Gama Pehlwan and the whole family. And he went to various princely states. He worked with Patiala court, he worked with Aditya court. And he went to London and he remained a world champion for more than 40 years. So that's something which brought fame to Lahore. If there is a vicinity, there is a region, someone becomes prominent, from that region. So this bring the focus, international focus on that particular region. So that's how that region became very, very important. Region means Lahore. And then filmmaking. There is a very good thesis on Lahore cinema from 1923 to 1947 by Nasreen Rahman. She did that PhD thesis from Cambridge, and I was there at Cambridge when she was writing it as just wonderful piece of work. And Lahore was the third largest movie making center, and not much has been done on that aspect. So all these things should be brought to light, and they should be taught. And urban spaces, the history of urban spaces and urban mohallas, that's how sociology and history comes together. So sociology, anthropology and history, if they're brought together and you just look at certain subspace within the city and try to bring it back to life on the piece of paper, that's, I think, a big contribution.
Thank you so much. So culture and sports activities were greatly patronized by the pre-colonial state in India. Wrestling was one local sport that greatly flourished in Lahore. Did the colonial rule change our ideas and attitudes toward the local sports?
It's a very interesting question. Yes, every colonial regime, it changes everything with respect to the colonized. I have been of the view for so long that colonial regime created a new human being with new tastes, with new mannerism, with new cultural and social understanding of the natural phenomenon, new worldview. So obviously the attitude towards sports also underwent a change. So we saw that there had been kabaddi in the matches, there had been kushti. And remember, kushti was popularized when the Iranian influence became paramount in subcontinent, because kushti flourished primarily in Iran. So when when British came here, they gave professionalism to that, because of the capitalistic mode of production. This profit and earning and all this became an integral part of any activity, particularly sports activity. So that activity or sports, it became a source of livelihood for the sportsman. So prior to that, that used to be not the case. It was a passion of a sportsman that used to lead him to adopt that particular occupation or preoccupation. So it was the British who introduced money into it, like Lala Amarnath, who was a cricketer. His earning was quite phenomenal in 1930s because he remarried, and when he remarried, he divorced his first wife, so he had to support his first wife, giving her 1,000 rupees in 1930s per month as a maintenance allowance. So since he had money, so he could do it. And where did he get all this money from? It was from princely states, because princely states used to patronize particularly kushti and cricket to a great extent. A few princely states used to patronize football also. So the change and the change in the sports culture was quite tangible under the British, of course, because new games were introduced. Football was introduced, volleyball was introduced, hockey was introduced, and cricket, which became very, very popular after partition in particular. In 1950s and 60s, hockey was very popular among India and Pakistan. Whenever these two nations used to play, lots of people used to congregate, But now cricket, because of this live telecast and all that, and celebrity status, now we have a cricket legend as our Prime Minister. Or the way Virat Kohli is being worshipped in India. So all this is because colonial state, popularized some elements towards the sports, that sports people were hailed as the heroes. Prior to that, Fazl Mahmood used to be the hero. So a particular relationship with the sportsman of a common man, that came about under the colonial state, because in the British education system, what I have understood, they emphasize a great deal on character building, and character building comes through sports. It does not come through studies. That is the reason in Oxford and Cambridge they emphasize a lot on sports. Every person play one sport or the other. That is in a way a compulsory, not in a black and white manner, but they try to force it on you. They make it compulsory that either you should go to the gym, you should run, you should do the drawing, so on and so forth, and cricket, rugby, so all these sports. So this culture was introduced here. Aligarh, in Aligarh, cricketer were adored. And same is the case with government college. Government college team was almost a second 11 to Pakistan's national team. So that attitude, bringing sports people into a limelight, and adoration and respect and deference being accorded to them, that was a colonial value which was accorded to us, which was given to us, bequeathed to us. That may be the answer to your question.
Professor, speaking of the gates of Lahore, with the new influences coming in incessantly, the intended influence of these gates has gradually faded and transformed over the years. So much so that today we cannot see those particular influences that the history books talk about. How do you see these gates as social and cultural spaces in colonial Lahore?
Well, the Androon Shahar, or the inner city or walled city, it was, look at the geographical specificity of that area. As on the GT road, it faces Data Darbar. It is at the center of the city. Center of the city means that it's at a very short distance to Lahore Fort, which had been a center of power, and similarly Jamia Masjid or Shahi Masjid. So it was in the center of the city, and all nobility used to live in those darwazas and those gates, prior to the advent of colonial state. So therefore it was a prime location. All nobility used to live there, and all socio-cultural activity happened because those people who had a taste in literature, who had a taste in artistry, some very good Hakim used to live there. That's the reason, the one bazaar of Bhati was Bazar-e-Hakima. So that remained the case until British occupied Lahore, and British thought that the center, power center, should be shifted away from the walled city. And the paradigmatic shift was quite stark. Lahore civil secretariat was built. Similarly, cantonment, which was in Anarkali Bazaar, it was shifted to Mia Mir. Open space, and this open space was because in 1857, War of Independence, they encountered a lot of problems in apprehending the rebels, because they used to disappear in those alleys and those streets, which were quite convoluted, very, very narrow, and they could not run after them. So with all power center, everything is in open space, the Roman style of town planning that has been elaborated by Will Glover in his book Making Lahore Modern. So that's how Lahore was rebuilt or reconceived by the British. So you see that towards the canal area, the whole thing was shifted, and the buildings that were built were constructed. They were like little fortifications, like railway station. Look at railway station. Railway station is like a fort. Similarly, the museum. If another 1857 happened, they thought that these buildings could be transformed into a small fortification, which could be used as a military camp. So that was at the back of their mind when they reconceived Lahore. So, and in that conception of British about this city, these darwazas and mohallas did not figure at all. So they made separate residence for themselves, GR1, GR2, and then this Zaman Park and all those areas along canal. So mohallas became redundant. These mohallas became redundant gradually, not at once, but steady depletion of those mohallas became a fact of history. And of course that process got accelerated after partition. In late 20s, Mall Town was built. And Mall Town was built for the nobility. Every person who had some prominence, he had his house in Mall Town. So Mall Town was and in 1930s, Gulberg came up. So these areas were inhabited under the British because they wanted open spaces, because congested cities, they were finding it hard to govern.
Lahore has a certain geostrategic importance for colonial trade. Do you think the British modeled the local behavior toward foreign trades? How successful were they? Did their influence still exist today?
Well, of course, Lahore had been the epicenter of trade even before the advent of colonialism, and under British, trade became even more important. And why and how did it become important? Because Punjab, after this colonization, canal colonization, and railway lines being laid out, so it became a granary of India. 3/4 of the needs of grain used to be fulfilled by the Punjab alone, because it had fertile land. And then Punjab also became a sword arm of India, because all this martial race theory, and people used to be recruited during First World War, during Second World War. 66% of the colonial army, it was from Punjab. And obviously, being a cultural and political center of Punjab, Lahore was very, very important. And all the trade routes used to emanate from Lahore, because obviously railway line was laid out here from 1859 onwards. And all the merchandise used to be brought to Lahore, and from there it used to go all around. And railway network played a very vital role here, not only for the transportation of the military personnel, but also for the merchandise. So far as the colonial goods and the taste that they cultivated among the local populace, of course, every colonial state does that. You just look at yourself and at myself, and the clothes that we are wearing, the language that we are talking to, even if we don't talk in this language, English, even if we talk in Urdu, Urdu too was promoted by the British. So look at our faces, the way we behave, the way our mannerism, our ethos, our social transformation that we have seen happening for last quite a few decades. It's all because of the colonial rule. So now this 3-meal pattern, daily pattern, was introduced by the British. Breakfast, and then lunch, then dinner, and sitting on the table, having your dinner. The way your classes are conducted is all church. This setup is that of a church. So we embraced it, and not only we embraced it willfully, it was imposed on us, but then we start feeling comfortable with that setup. So everything that we got, it became a part of our culture. Now we own them. Even our religious ideas have their genealogy laid out somewhere in the colonial period. So food, of course, and colonial goods, of course. We survived because of the colonial goods. Because colonial goods transform your own local products. They rather displace your local products. The cloth started pouring into India from Lancashire, Manchester, and Leicestershire. So here your local khadi, local weaving class, that was rendered out of job. And that weaving class became absolutely anti-colonial force.
Many educational institutions that were set up during the British Raj reflect their declared goal of educating or modernizing the locals. Then why do we come across an intelligentsia faction consisting of rebels such as Bhagat Singh, Madan Lal, Ubaidullah Sindhi that vehemently opposed the colonial rule and desired its end?
When I say that colonial dispensation created a new human being, though Dr. Hussain Khan disagrees with me, he says that no, it was an interface between the colonized and the colonizer, and to a great extent he is right. But if I insist on that assertion, that colonialism created a new human here, and how do you create a new human from your colonized or your ruled people, your subjects, by educating them in a particular way. You create a new mentality. You can conquer a city, you can conquer a province or a country, but you cannot conquer minds through force. You can conquer minds through education. So they created a new education system and that necessitated the establishment of new education institutions like Government College Lahore, like Oriental College, like FC College. FC College was created by American Presbyterians, but the agenda was the same. Similarly, Gordon College and Murray College, Sialkot, and you come across such institutions in every city. Sacred Heart was in every city almost. Civil Lines was in every city. So, and missionaries used to come and teach. School system was run mostly by the missionaries, like Sacred Heart, Convent Jesus and Mary, Cathedral, all these schools were run by the missionaries. So that school system, that education system, it created a particular human being, and that human being being adored, few concepts, they were of Western orientation, Western nature, and freedom was one. The freedom as conceived by our mystics and our local intelligentsia is different. That freedom is embedded somewhere in the spirit of submission. You submit to God and you become free. But in the Western sense, freedom is something absolutely different. You need an individual to have full freedom to act, full freedom to think, full freedom to speak. And that was not happening in 1920s and 1930s of Punjab, in particular if we talk about Punjab and Lahore. So all these Udham Singh and Bhagat Singh, and before that Ubaidullah Sindhi, having born, lived and bred in that environment, they embraced that idea of freedom, that we are masters of our own destiny. So in order to win back that mastery over their own destiny, they fought. But to a great extent, these ideas came from the West. So that's some sort of a dichotomous sort of situation whereby we adopted Western ideals, owned them, internalized them, and then fought for them and laid out our lives for them. Freedom is the case in point. Even a person like Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi had to deal with modernization. He had to travel by train. He couldn't do without it, despite the fact that he was absolutely antithetical towards modernity. He thought that the modern society have these two agents of modernization. One is the lawyers. He himself was a lawyer, but he hated lawyers. And second was doctors. These are the reservoirs, and these were the wellsprings of evil, according to him. His wife died, but he never administered him allopathic medicine. But he couldn't do without modernity. He had to speak in English. He used to travel by train. He used to wear spectacles, which was the product of modernity. And all the ideals that he promoted, and those ideals of egalitarianism, the uplift of the poor, that idea also came from the West. So it's all-encompassing phenomenon. It has to be debated more, the impact of colonialism on us.
So disregarding the unfortunate pandemic, the last couple of years brought Lahore to the limelight in the world of tourism. While reading your book, I learned that the British more than a century ago were taking special measures to enhance tourism in Lahore. You discuss the literature produced for tourists and travelers who wish to visit Lahore. Professor, my question is, what kind of voices do you find in this literature? Is it always hegemonic, or are there surprises, curiosities, and appreciation for Lahore and its people?
Well, all of them put together, yes. All these voices are intertwined. And one cannot say that it was curiosity alone. It was curiosity, of course, but it was not curiosity alone. It was hegemonic, but hegemonic in a very implicit way. The British intelligentsia used to be hegemonic, of course, but their hegemony was not very palpable. It was not demonstrated openly that they're hegemonic. What British had been very good at were to create a consent. The creation of consent was a wonderful instrument with the British to cultivate among the colonized. And colonized used to think that, we are inferior people, of course. We are not as good as our masters are. Therefore, we must adopt the ways and means and the mode of life that our colonial masters are putting in practice, or they are observing. So about Lahore, they were quite wonderstruck. They were awed by Lahore, the grandeur of Lahore. But they knew this for sure, that in the colonial situation, you have to exercise your power, and that becomes quite explicit in the literature and the pamphlets that we came across. And it was really strange that on Flatty's Hotel, the material that Ian Talbot found was at the city archives of Peterborough. Peterborough is between Cambridge and Leicester City. It's a major town, but every city has a city archives. So in that city archives, he found out that material, and we read it, and it was really fascinating. And similarly, when you talk about this tourism, this religious tourism was very, very important to mention, because it was in the 1860s that Hajj, people were encouraged to go to Hajj. And people were encouraged to go to Hajj not because British wanted people to go to Hajj. In fact, all the management of Hajj and pilgrims and looking after and their transport and their quarantine and their medical facilities were given over to Thomas and Cook. Thomas and Cook was a firm, British firm, which had capitalistic designs. So through facilitating Muslims to go on Hajj, they used to earn a lot of profit. Thomas Cook became billionaire, billionaire worth of firm, just because of the Hajis. People used to go on railway to Bombay, from Bombay to through ship, through sea. They used to go to Iskandariya, from Iskandariya or Alexandria to Jeddah, and from Jeddah to Makkah. And all this route was managed, overseen by the British, Thomas Cook. And obviously Thomas Cook was very, very influential. So that's how religion was used, and religious tourism was used to satisfy the capitalistic urges of such multinational companies like Thomas Cook. And same was the case with people going to Iran and Iraq for, particularly people from Ahl Tashi, going to Imam Raza's mausoleum or Karbala, and so that too was encouraged. Well, you better go. That sort of a tourism. And then people had been coming here to various tombs, like Data Sahib had a great a circle of devotees all around India. Same was Hazrat Mian Mir. And Shah Hussain in particular. Shah Hussain ka Mela was such a big phenomenon. People from all across North India, they used to congregate, they used to come and live here for 3 days. And that is until 1970s, Shah Hussein's Mela Jaga used to be annual event of a great fanfare. It was only from 1980s that Data Sahib stole a limelight. Until 1860s, the saint patron of Lahore city had been Shah Hussain.
Okay.
But it was because of the British, and that's at least I believe, that they transferred that metal onto Data Sahib.
Author Philip Giridio, in his book Lahore, the Framework for Urban Conservation, has discussed how Lahore has been the cultural capital of Pakistan and has retained its heritage despite centuries of turbulence. And even the local sentiments clearly exhibits a pride in their cultural vitality. Your work somehow contests this assertion. Please tell us more about how you look at that.
Well, so far as culture is concerned, one must understand one thing, that it's a fluid phenomenon. It does not stand still, or it does not freeze in time. It keeps on flowing. So Lahore had been unfortunate to undergo several turbulent periods, particularly 18th century Lahore was a very scary period of history that it went through. But of course, when such turbulent times came to the experience of a collectivity of humans living in certain area, they get close-knit, and their culture also becomes a bit rigid. But so far as Lahore is concerned, the permanent inflow of refugees from all around, it kept its culture cosmopolitan to a great extent. Particularly after 1849, when British annexed Punjab and Lahore became the capital of Punjab, they invested a lot of effort and a lot of resources on Lahore to enrich its culture, to enrich its social capital through the establishment of various educational institutions and so on and so forth. So this inflow of refugees, like Sir Gangaram's father was from Moradabad. Moradabad is in UP. So they came to Punjab because Punjab was a land of opportunities, and they came to Lahore, and from Lahore his father went to Mangtamala, and then Gangaram started living in Lahore. Similarly, Rai Melaram, he was the first textile mill owner here in Lahore. So he too, his elders or his forebears are from somewhere mainland India, but they came to. This street behind Government College is Chatterjee Street. Who was this Chatterjee? Chatterjee was Vice Chancellor of Punjab. He was a Bengali. So all these people came and they lived here. Muhammad Hussain Azad was from Delhi. He died here, he taught here, and he buried here in Karbala Gamesha. So Altaf Hussain Hali came here. He wanted to go to Delhi, but he came to Lahore instead. Dagh Delvi came here and stayed at Bhati for some time. Arshid Gurgani was from Lucknow. You know, all these people, they came here and they enriched Lahore's culture. So Lahore culture never died down, despite the fact that because of the 18th century turmoil, as culture seemed to be frozen in time for a while. But then this cascading inflows of migrants, it put a new lease of life, new life into Lahore's culture. So that may be my answer to your question, that this culture not only it became alive, it became cosmopolitan because it accepted the influences from outside. You know, culture and people and the ideas, they remain alive until and unless they keep responding to the influences, accepting influences from outside, and impacting the outside influences from their own, cultural input. That is very, very important. And that's what happened. They contributed. Bade Ghulam Ali Khan was from Kasur. He lived here in Lahore. Muhammad Rafi was from Lahore. He became the biggest male singer at Bollywood. Devanand was alumni of Government College. Similarly, many others. So all of them, where Sahir Ludhianvi came in the limelight. He worked in Lahore for quite some time. Om Prakash was from Lahore. So Lahore not only accepted outside influences, it also contributing in enriching the culture of other regions also. So it was very, very lively. So the only thing is that Lahore could not attract scholarly focus. So since now people have started working on Lahore, the literary streak, for instance, the first Muslim feminist was from Lahore, Muhammadi Begum. She was wife of Maulvi Mumtaz Ali, who was the father of Imtiaz Ali Taj. So these were the people. Hagook Niswa came from here. Adbi Dunya came from here. Hazar Dastan came from Lahore. Rafai Aam, जो press है, that was established from here. So ये जो और इतनी किताबें, इतनी अखबारें, ये सारा कुछ यहाँ से publish होता था. So it was truly a cultural epicenter of the entire northern India. And one thing that I will admit, I will confess, while agreeing with KKZ, is that partition robbed Lahore of its glamour. No, it was such a glamorous city. People from every stripe, people from every hue could be found out here. Jews, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, British, French, Italians, and particularly this Thandi Sadak or the mall, it was all Anglo-Indians used to do their business. But, after partition, this multicolored cultural dispensation, it lost in the thin air.
Professor, how do you see the ramification of British colonial role on cultural and social heritage of Punjab, and particularly on the Punjabi language?
Many years ago, I argued that it was a great travesty which was committed by the British by introducing Urdu here as a vernacular. I'm not against Urdu. I like Urdu. I read a lot in Urdu. But my own contention was that Punjabi is our mother tongue, so our vernacular should have been Punjabi. But they declared Urdu as our court language in 1854, and then they gave Urdu the status of a vernacular of Punjab. And therefore Punjabis mostly didn't know Urdu, therefore the people from other areas, they came here, they settled down, and they became prominent here. Because after English, Urdu was the second official language. So, and why did British did that? Because all the administrators who came to Punjab, they were mostly trained in UP. And from Fort William College, many officers had learned Urdu. So it was just an administrative convenience. And it also disrupted the one-to-one connection, intimate connection with between the ruler and the ruled. When you don't know the language, then obviously you need intermediary. So intermediary becomes very powerful. जैसे ये होता है कि मिडिल मैन या आड़ती आ जाता है बीच में, किसान और ख़रीदार के बीच में. So these artis were the clerical staff or ahmad. So they used to translate the decision making and the ruling of the British. But British, despite some dissident voices from among themselves, they were bent upon enforcing Urdu as a vernacular, and they brought out Sarkari Akhbar, and in Oriental College, several professors from UP, they were brought in, and they, Muhammad Hussain Azad himself was a case in point. And then they held mushairas in 1874, which changed the whole characteristic of your Urdu poetry. And then Altaf Hussain Hali came here, translation bureau was set up here. So Urdu was promoted. And here, so far as in Punjab is concerned, Urdu became a bridge between various communities. Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims all used to speak Urdu. They used to compose poetry in the same language. They used to hold manazras, religious disputations in the same language. Like Hindu opinion was articulated in Partab and Milab. These were two newspapers. Similarly, Muslims, obviously, they owned Urdu as a language of their own. Zimidar, Paisa Akhbar, then Rafiq-e-Hind, then Inqilab, all these newspapers represented Muslim voice. So Urdu became, Urdu was adopted by the Punjabis. That is despite the point that Khwaja Ghulam Farid was the last classical poet who shared his temporality with Iqbal. He died in early 20th century. But Punjabi didn't get what it deserved, of course. But then Punjabis were quite comfortable with Urdu. Iqbal started doing his poetry in Urdu, and then Punjabis were quite comfortable with Urdu. They adopted Urdu. Now most of us speak Urdu at home. And Punjabi has been relegated to the status of a language that is spoken by menials. That's unfortunate. But having said all that, this this version was contested by many people. And when I wrote about it in newspaper first of all, and later on I developed it into a full-fledged research article. That column in a newspaper was, as if it spread out a wildfire in the jungle. People were so against. Well, I'm against Pakistan, I'm against national language of Pakistan, I'm this and that. Well, we can have several national languages. India has 21 national languages. So I'm of the opinion that we should have many national languages, including Urdu, including English. Without English, your education will go to dogs. You know, English is very, very important. You know, its significance must not be understated. But if you'll transform everything into Urdu and impose Urdu all across, you know, that will ruin the whole higher education. That's my own opinion, you know. So, and secondly, how many people we find out who are proficient in Urdu. Urdu लिखना अंग्रेज़ी से भी ज़्यादा मुश्किल होता है। उर्दू जिस तरह की लिखते हैं लोग, और उर्दू की खिदमत सबसे ज़्यादा तो अंग्रेज़ी पढ़े हुए ना, फैज़ अहमद फैज़ की डिग्री अंग्रेज़ी में थी। इकबाल ने जब भी नसर लिखनी होती थी, यूज्ड टू राइट इन इंग्लिश। इकबाल्स इंग्लिश वाज, आई थिंक, वेरी गुड। Similarly, Fraz ki apni Intizar Hussain had masters in English. So people who Tahir Kamran sir was English teacher. Quratul Ain Haider ki degree jo hai, that was in English. So those were the people who did their degrees in English, but they served the cause of Urdu and also Punjabi. Ab so far as Punjabi is concerned, ye naare to bahut lagate hain. But this has to be borne in mind that the grammar was written by the British, grammar of Punjabi. Punjabi was also systematized to a certain extent by the British colonial administrators. So similarly, ये सराइकी का जो सारा किस्सा है, ये भी ब्रिटिश ने शुरू किया. Christopher Shackle, you know, Hussain Saab has written a full, you know, small book on that. That's very, very interesting work. So language के issue के ऊपर, religion के issue के ऊपर जितनी भी controversies हैं, those controversies were started off by the British. There is no doubt about this.
Many important Sufi shrines are located in Lahore. What kind of changes do you think the colonial state brought about in Lahore's Sufi shrine culture?
Well, it's my personal opinion. You may disagree with it, but I still assert, because I have been holding discussions with various friends of mine. I think that that there had been a transformation by the last quarter of the 19th century, and that shift which had taken place, as I alluded to you earlier, that Shah Hussain was replaced with Ali Hijweri Data Ganjbak. Similarly, the Sufis and Dargah, Sufi and Dargah was the center of Muslim religious sensibility prior to the British. Sufi had been very important, or Wali, or you know, or Peer, whatever you call it, and Dargah that was visited by a large number of Punjabis on frequent basis. But British could not rationalize this practice. According to their rationality, you know, all this social practice of going to the shrine and believing in some supra-rational powers that the Peer used to hold, it didn't make sense to them. So my own opinion is by introducing print culture, by introducing literacy, by introducing rationality, the shift occurred from Sufi and Dargah to a Maulvi and Masjid. This change occurred by the turn of the century, and as you see with the passage of time, Maulvis became more important, and even Sufis had to accept their superiority, and they tried to behave exactly the way Maulvis had been behaving. You know, Peer Jamaat Ali Shah, the way he was a Peer, but he totally transformed himself in the light of the ulama. And same is the case with Sial Sharif Dargah, it was transformed. And why is it that I far too often refer to this, that Data Ganjbakhsh was hailed as Saint Patron. I love Data Sahib and his book Kashful Majoob and his English translation by Nicholson as wonderful piece of literature. But since Data Ganjbakhsh had written a book, so he had that literary trait which Shah Hussain lacked. Shah Hussain said in poetry whatever he had. His sensibility was transmitted to the next generation through poetry. And poetry which was extraterrestrial, which was written in socio-cultural symbols which British or the colonial mind could not grasp. And Kashful Majoob was a book that could be read easily. And that was the first treatise on the history of Sufism, according to many. So that changed, and now it was from the 19th century that masjid within Dargah became more important. And now you can see the size of a Dargah here in Data Ganj. It's tiny, and look at the mosque. Mosque is huge. With minarets, and a lot of investment has gone into it. And same is the case with a few weeks back I went to Pakistan and I observed the same. The Dargah is just a little bit, but look at the masjid. Masjid is a whole mahalla can be inhabited in its premises. So, and lots of money, particularly from Zaulak's days, masjid and Maulvi attained a lot of prominence. That prominence was much before that. Even Iqbal didn't like Sufis that much. He was very close friend of Salman Nadwi, but he thinks that 3 or 4 reasons that Muslim decline became precipitated. One was this Sufism. So that change initiated under the British, and that change continues. And now everyone says that, well, if you want to ask for some favor, do it directly from God. Why are you going to the graves? So all this is very rational explanation that your connection should be direct with the God. But then you are dehistoricizing the local religion. All this historical passage that this idea of religion has gone through, you are just excising it, and you are dehistoricizing, ahistoricizing it. This dehistoricization is a big problem, epistemic problem. These are 2 problems that we must guard against. One is this dehistoricization of our culture, of our religious practices, and second is exclusion. You tend to exclude people, that he is kafir, he is gadar, he is this. These 2 things, if you can guard against, Pakistan is going to be a transformed place altogether. So as a young people, these are the 2 things which are anathema for us, which are poison for us. Don't exclude anyone. We have to live as a collectivity as well as an individual. So there has to be an equilibrium, balance between individual and collectivity. And this is what I have been emphasizing on. And second is, don't exclude anyone. And second is, don't dehistoricize things. आपको लगेगा कि ये तोहम प्रस्ती है, but well, तोहम प्रस्ती can, that the person who is in the midst of that toham prasti, this will be a firm belief system for him. So you have to engage with him differently, instead of just forcing a fatwa on him.
Professor, in the end, I want to ask, please tell us about your experience working with the foreign co-author Ian Talbot.
With Ian, first time I met Ian in New Delhi in 1997, and at that time I was translating his book Hizr Diwana into Urdu. And I told him that I'm translating your book, and he was very happy. And later on in 2001, I went to England, and I went to Coventry when then he was teaching at University of Coventry. And ever since we are friends, and then I had a very good fortune that I was selected as a Commonwealth Fellow, and I worked with him for 6 months at University of Southampton. And that was a very, very fertile period for me. I learned a lot from him, and I think he is the best trainer. The way he trains people, and he has tremendous patience, and the understanding of research methodology is immense, so it was just a pleasure working with him. Learning from him. I wanted to work with him, and to some mutual friends I said that, well, with Ian we have been traveled together, we have gone to various conferences together, but all in sundry he has been editing books with. But when I say that, well, Ian, let's work on a book together, so he waits somehow or the other. But then when I went to Cambridge, Ian and his wife came over to Cambridge to stay with us for a couple of days. Then he himself said that, what do you think, Tahir, if we do a book on Lahore? So I said, well, because I was very keen on working on, this religious exclusion, because I had written quite a bit on that, and so I thought that, well, with Ian contributing a couple of chapters into it, so that will be a good book to be published by some foreign publisher. So, but he said, no, what about Lahore? So I said, well, give me a week or 10 days, let me think it over. So then, I thought about it. I discussed it with Christopher Bailey, who was my director. So he said, no, it's a very good, because Lahore has not been looked at by historians from this angle of city and beyond. So then we started working on it. So we went through many drafts, and the most difficult was writing on akhadas and mushairas, because all material was oral, or it was based on hearsay, and one person was telling something, the other person was telling something entirely different. So making sense of these two contradictory statements and gleaning some truthful element out of that was really a Herculean task, but thankfully we managed to do it. And then it was published from London, from New York, and from New Delhi. So that was all because of Ian. Ian thought that, well, this book is worthy to be published from these three places. So a wonderful experience, and it was a great learning experience also, because I worked under him when I was a young fellow. He trained me in the art of writing research article, but not the book. So that is the reason I wanted to work with him, not with anybody from Cambridge, but with Ian, because I think he knows Pakistanis quite a lot, and he is very balanced, and he knows Lahore quite a lot, and this your department quite a lot. He had been to this department countless times, lecturing and spending time and listening to, because we used to teach our students post-colonial theory, and in that, colonial was the villain. So he, being a white man, he used to come here, and the students would ask such probing questions, such prickly questions to him, but he used to hold himself in utmost patience. He was not ruffled or fazed, so with a lot of patience he used to handle all those very, very tough and spicy questions.
Professor, thank you so very much for taking our time and joining us. It was truly an enlightening afternoon. My panelists and I are honored to have had this conversation with you, and I hope that this discussion would be very insightful for our audience as well. I thank you again.
A pleasure is all mine.